Hello and welcome to the premiere episode of the 1UP Retronauts podcast. This is where we get together and talk about old video games. It's what we do.
I like old video games.
Old video games are awesome.
Don't. They are. Oh,
really? I am
then?
the host of sorts, Jeremy Parrish, 1UP.com features editor. And with me here we have, let's just go around the table and introduce ourselves.
I'm Andrew Fitch, just say was copy editor, editorial contributor. I was importing Final Fantasy games before the heroes were all androgynous.
Scott Sharkey, staff writer, professional 12-year-old.
Chris Kohler, freelancer, and I imported Final Fantasy V before I could read Japanese.
Okay, so the reason I guess everyone's giving their Final Fantasy credentials at the moment is because this episode is actually a discussion of Final Fantasy III, which
Is not the one with Kefka.
is coming out for DS very soon in the US. It's actually been out for a few weeks in Japan, racking up impressive sales because that's what DS games do in Japan. But yes, as Chris mentioned, this is a remake of the game that is not the Super NES game. It does not have Kefka. It does not have transforming pink women with angst issues, and there's no suicide as far as I can
There's
tell.
very
Can I go
little
back
angst.
upstairs then?
Yeah.
There are pale silver-haired gamblers.
There's little angst
there?
or much
No,
of
there's
anything to speak of, isn't there? Because it's
No,
really
there's really not much story to Final Fantasy III at all. But it is kind of a significant release for the DS or in general, just because it's the one Final Fantasy game that has never come to the US.
Right.
So that's why we're talking about it, because there are a few of us who have played it, the original version for Famicom, and a few of us who have played the import. Actually, I guess all of us have played the import here.
A
have.
couple minutes.
Yeah, well, sure.
Okay.
That's about all I've played of the original Famicom game. So it kind of balances out.
Yeah, we're even.
At some point, we've played some element of the game.
Oh, have you played the original Famicom game?
Yeah. No, well, I played the pirated fan sub
Oh,
thing.
don't admit that. Don't admit that.
Of
No,
course,
it's got
no.
emoticons in it. It makes it better.
We might as well just admit it. I mean, the only way to really play Final Fantasy III, unless you read Japanese, which admittedly two of us here do, is to have played the hacked ROM version that some kind soul, Neil Corlett maybe?
Somebody.
Translated into English and then made available on the internet so that you could illegally download a copy of the Japanese game, apply the patch, and play it in English.
And then somebody made a cartridge for you, right?
Yeah, actually, someone did create a fake cartridge version of Final Fantasy III for me based on the English version. It's a long and complicated process, and I don't really understand how it happened, but yeah. So anyway, Final Fantasy III.
Did not come out in the United States of America.
No, and that's actually... I've actually spoken to the director of the game twice now, and both times he's expressed regret over the fact that his game did not make it to the U.S. But of course, it was just a casualty of the NES to Super NES switchover, because Final Fantasy I came out in Japan in 1987, but didn't make it here for 3 years.
Right.
And the next year, Super NES arrived.
Yeah.
So I think...
Which is not to
Nintendo-
say that they immediately canceled all plans for Final Fantasy II and III, because as we know...
No, Final Fantasy II actually was translated into English.
Yep.
The Japanese
Yeah, they
NES
translated the
Final Fantasy
wrong
II.
one. The
Right.
sucky one.
Right, and I think it's actually kind of a mercy killing that they didn't bring that one over, and they
Pretty
brought
much.
over Final Fantasy IV for Super NES instead of 2.
Yeah. I mean, Square Enix, they released all of those Final Fantasy Adventure, the sagas on the Game Boy. Like, they were all about translating as many games as they possibly could. It was just Nintendo that shut them down. They were like, yeah, not so much.
Yet they were still
bad.
making like Ninja Turtles fighting games on that thing until like
94.
last year. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think this was just a matter of there being a Super NES sequel on the way. So it would have been kind of pointless to release
wanna hamstring
Final Fantasy
themselves
II
with that,
and then
yeah.
Final Fantasy IV together, because let's face it, Final Fantasy IV was so much better, even in its
Yeah.
dumbed down American version that came here as Final Fantasy II.
And not only that, but, I mean, people say this a lot, and I kind of grind my teeth when I hear it sometimes, or used to hear it, about how, well, these games were too hard for Americans, so we didn't release them here. But Final Fantasy 2 and 3 were pretty hard.
Yeah, they were. I think a lot of people are going to be horribly shocked and surprised when they play the DS game, because most Americans who have played Final Fantasy III have played via emulators, so they have save states, so they can go into the dungeons and hit save whenever they want. That ability is not actually in the DS game. In fact, there are no save
I
points.
can't play it then.
You save on the overworld, and that's it. So that means you go into a dungeon and you fight for 30 minutes, And you better
that last dungeon.
You better damn well beat the boss on your first try, because otherwise you have to do the dungeon all over again, and you don't get to save your experience.
Well, you
just
can
game
quick
over.
save, but
Well, a quick save is just temporary.
Yeah, it just holds
But
you
if
down.
you want to take a
Save,
break
that's-
from it, you can.
You can take a
Well-
break, but you can't save your progress
Yeah.
mid-dungeon. And
Well-
the final dungeon is just like it's terrible. I mean, not like in a bad game sort of sense. It's just terrible in the biblical sense that like there's a dragon
Great,
rising
and-
out of the sea about to devour you.
Well, it's very difficult. I mean, and it's really long. But the thing is that the other dungeons in
Well, isn't it like a
because-
series of like 4 boss fights with nothing in between?
Yeah, basically.
Actually, there are, I think, 12 bosses in the final dungeon.
Oh,
if
for
you want to
Christ's
do all
sake.
the extra bonus weapons and stuff.
Well, I stopped
the
at
final
4.
dungeon. Yeah, the final
I
dungeon
won.
is 3 parts with like 4 bosses per section. And they said the one thing they did add to the game is the exit spell, which lets you warp out of the dungeon.
They added that?
Yeah, that was not originally in the game, if you can
Whoa.
believe that. You actually had to fight through that gigantic final dungeon from start to finish.
I made heavy use of that playing through this game.
Yeah.
Like, that's what I would do. If I needed to save, and I always would, I'd just get up. You can always tell where a boss room is, mostly. I mean, you just get through this whole big winding dungeon.
yeah, it's
you get up
because
in there,
nothing else
and-
attacks you there, and there's like a
Yeah.
little sprite of a guy going, "Ah."
well, that, and sometimes, like, it's just a...
So what do? You
it's a
play all the way through the
symmetrical
dungeon,
room
kill a
that's
boss,
opened up.
then exit or backtrack back, save,
actually-
go through again
actually,
and do
we
it
don't
again?
beat the
Yeah, but the
bosses.
thing is, the dungeons aren't that long because once they copied the dungeons over from the Famicom game pretty reliably to the DS, and when you can dash through them, they're not really
Yeah,
that
the dungeons take a long time your first time through because you're pretty low level, and the enemies, the standard enemies, are pretty tough in comparison. But if you fight through to the boss room and then warp out and then fight back through again,
But you're still having to do this like 4 times.
Yeah, but it's
no,
real.
I mean,
it's
each
short.
one you just have to fight through a second time. I found,
Okay.
and by the time you reach the boss's room, you're pretty much capable of taking on everything in the dungeon on pretty even footing.
Yeah.
It's just time consuming.
It is, but the second trip through the dungeon is really fast because you're pretty much just plowing through stuff, and you know where to go.
Yeah, the
you're
first
not
trip
going
through a
out.
Final Fantasy dungeon usually bores the crap right out of me.
Well, you're not usually going off on the side paths to get treasure because you got those your first
Right.
time.
That's right.
Yeah, that's the thing. What makes it take a lot of time is to go off and get the treasure chest, but once you know exactly what way to run through, you can go back through in like a couple of minutes.
Yeah, it doesn't take very long. And on top of that, the
And
bosses.
on top of that, most of the treasure chests are crap. So, look, a bell for the Geomancer I'm never going to use.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, the bosses actually recharge your energy and magic points now when you beat them, which apparently they also did not do in the Famicom game. So it's kind of amazing that people actually played the Famicom game in its original form because
Yep.
it sounds like it was made by people who really, really hate everyone and want them to be sad.
Speaking of, actually, I was going to ask for clarification because I don't remember this so clearly. But the mini dungeons and the frog dungeons that are all over the beginning of the game, do you have to go through
There's
those in mini the whole damn way?
2 dungeons where you have to go through in mini, but
Yeah.
the frog dungeons, you just have to enter as a frog, and then you
Okay,
can go
and
back
then you
to
can unfrog,
Yeah,
but you
you
still have to go all the way through
It's really
Right.
easy. They're really quick, and you can run from all the battles. It's not.
Or on top of that, you could just use the like the staves and stuff that let you cast Fire 2 or whatever. Or
No,
Fire.
I still didn't like him. I don't know. I mean, it's like 2 frog dungeons, 2 mini dungeons near the beginning of the game. That's a great first
you
impression
just,
to make.
yeah.
Yeah.
You just change to all wizards, and that's part of the strategy.
I don't want to be all wizards.
You make an interesting
Wizards
point
suck.
that...
You have to.
They wear dresses. Fuck them.
Okay.
Except for red wizards, you know.
Yeah, but Red Wizards turn out to be fairly useless about the.
I know, but I
game.
still play through the whole
Right.
game with 4 of them.
Huh.
I mean, until I get scholars.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. Scholars are great.
Yeah,
they
makes
like
sense.
They hit
great?
people with
at you.
books, yeah.
Actually, because of the way the jobs balance in this game, there was actually a
balance?
point. Somewhat, yeah.
Nah.
There was actually a point at which my scholar was my strongest character, and that
You're shitting me.
That is
that
weird.
kind of made me sad. I was
Yeah.
like, this shouldn't be the case.
They
No,
they
they-
screwed around with the job system, which I think we're going to
They should be a prestige
talk
class.
a lot more about.
Yeah, I've since I've never really played the Famicom game that much. As I was playing the DS game, I was kind of going hand in hand with a guide to the Famicom game just to see, like how things compare between games. And from what I can tell, like the final jobs that you get in the game, which were like amazing, awesome
yeah,
in the Famicom
what,
version.
Ninja and Sage.
Ninja.
Yeah, they're
Sage.
pretty much.
They got
They're
nerfed.
not useless now,
Nerfed
but they're
to
much
CW, I
less
should say.
powerful in comparison to the other classes.
The problem
But
with that...
according to the director, they did not tone down this class. He says that what happened is they beefed up the other classes in comparison. But
Why?
from what I read, I don't really think that's true.
No, because the ninja used to be able to equip every weapon, and
Yeah.
the sage used to be able to equip all the magic and
Yeah,
use them...
including summons.
Yeah. Well, the sage can still equip white, black, and summon, but the power of white and black magic is cut down.
Well, he also has way less magic than everyone else.
Yes, also true.
which actually, well, that's kind of tangential. But one thing I noticed about playing Final Fantasy III is that I appreciated Final Fantasy IV all the more because I suddenly realized that basically what Final Fantasy IV is a Final Fantasy III fan fiction, where all your characters, all of your characters are basically like
justifying their job changes.
Yeah, they all have jobs taken from Final Fantasy III. I mean, a paladin is a knight, but aside from that,
except you don't have all your guys in Final Fantasy III nobly self-sacrifice themselves.
Well,
like
of
9
course,
times
that's why it's fan fiction
each.
because it's kind of amateurish and dopey in that way.
They're taking,
but I mean, you have Sage Tella who has all the best magic, but he also has crap for magic points. Like, everyone has more magic points than him because he's limited by the story to just 90 magic points.
You're right.
And the Sage is like that in Final Fantasy 3DS. Like, you have access to all this magic, and you can't cast any of it because you have, like, very little magic points compared to everyone else.
Wow.
Yeah,
this game makes me really appreciate Final Fantasy V for its
much better
job system.
Right, because the job system was much better. Or
so what, he just ends up, like, drinking ether, like I do, I guess. I don't know.
But what?
Never mind.
Is that ether? I thought that was
Are you talking about either in the Final Fantasy sense or either
Ether in the Final Fantasy sense,
Okay.
absolutely.
But I mean, playing through Final Fantasy III, I mean, it sort of made me regret that I didn't get the chance to play through it, in the correct order originally. Because as you start Final Fantasy IV, Cecil's like a Dark Knight, Kain is the Dragon Knight. I refuse to call it Dragoon. That's a mistranslation. That's terrible localization. I'm sorry, but
you're a dork.
well, yeah. You would have a better appreciation of what their jobs are and what they're actually doing. Whereas, most all of us playing it, I mean, we just, what is this Dark Knight? We don't even know what it is. When they told you to turn to a paladin, I was like, why are they telling me to do this? It didn't really mean anything to me. Of course, I was younger then. I was kind of stupid, but
no, I made perfect sense. I watched Star Wars.
Yeah. But you're right in that there's a context there if you've played Final Fantasy 2 and 3 that
there's an evolution of design throughout the entire series that I think we missed out on.
Ouch.
Yeah. Anyway.
And they never spoke of it again. But yeah, I kind of hated that. I got when I got the karateka job, and I was like, oh my god, I'm going to turn my monk into a karateka, and it's going to be awesome. And then he's like goes back to level 0 karateka,
and it turns out you
does
really
significantly
suck at
less damage. Yeah, it's like you nerf the job. Like, at least the problem is that they fucked around with it, but now there's no progression. Now there's no like, okay, what do I do? What job should my guy
I think that was part of their design, was to make it so it was less like a linear progression and more like you can be any class and every class is kind of useful. But the problem is that
you have to take a slight kick in the ass every time you get a new
there's
class.
no real advantage to being a karateka over a monk, because by that point in the game your monk is like level 70 and he's just completely amazing, and you go to karateka and you're actually dealing less damage.
Yep.
And there's no reason to ever be a scholar except on one boss, other than anything.
Well, they have ponytails. That's a good reason.
But even in Final Fantasy V, there are final classes. There's no final. There's nothing.
Well, Final
to build
Fantasy V
towards.
had the bear ability where you could
but
go
also
back
mimic.
to your basic class. I guess they're calling it freelancer now.
Yeah.
Where you could go back to the basic class and equip all these things that you mastered and basically become like your little tiny gods.
Yeah.
You could have 4 classless characters who are actually vastly more powerful than any single class. And you don't have that ability in 3, which I think is sorely missed. I wish that you could go back and, if you mastered a monk or whatever, go back into the freelancer class and equip the freelancer with some of those skills and mix and match. I think that's something that they would have been well advised to have included in this.
Now there is a new hidden class, right? Did you play that far?
Where you get
FF3, the Onion Knight
Yeah,
class?
that was what you
get the
started
Mognet
with,
to
wasn't
work.
it?
No.
Right, now you start as a freelancer, just like
Yep.
Final Fantasy V.
Yep.
Okay, so you do
And
have a
the Onion-
freelancer thing.
Right, and
Yeah,
the,
but it
You
doesn't do anything.
it's
the
not
freelancer is
effective.
basically
Oh,
like
it's just
you
it's
can
just
do
a
everything
crap throwaway.
badly.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Okay. But
Well, apparently.
so what? You have to earn Onion Knight now?
Yeah, you have
Yes.
to find it. No, you don't have to earn it. You
I thought
have
that was
to
just something you played with if
create
you were
letters on
bloody-minded.
Wi-Fi.
Yeah, you
connection
have
get it.
to send Wi-Fi letters to people.
Did you get that to work? Because I couldn't get it to work. I mean,
No,
not like I want to do that.
Oh, you
but-
couldn't get it to work at all?
Yeah, I couldn't get it to work.
You had to, friend codes and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
You have to have friends.
Yeah, basically.
I had
right.
no
This is one of
friends.
those
You have to
things
have
that
friends with the
people, prior to the U.S. release, us who are in a position of opulence,
Unfathomable
luxury,
power.
Yes,
Yeah, right.
we're disadvantaged here because we can't get the Onion Knight, we can't get the ultimate final bosses, all of whom are unlocked by the Wi-Fi function. So that's something that we'll actually have to wait until other people that we know and like,
Right.
assuming there are any, get the game.
Assuming, well, I mean, that you want to play through the game again on your own copy,
Yeah, that's
not a
kind of
reviewable.
the disadvantage of reviewing DS games, because you don't have memory cards, and so you play all the way to the end in the import or the review version, and then the box version comes out.
Yep.
And everyone else is playing it, and you want to participate and be their friend, but you have to go and unlock all that stuff and make all that progress again, and it's a big pain in the ass.
Yep.
That's Nintendo.
You know what's awesome? Final Fantasy III's music.
Is it?
I would agree. I mean, I think for the time it was released, it was quite complicated. I mean, if you hear the OST that was released like a few years after the game, I mean, it's quite complicated. You know, I think it's on par with 4 and the other games.
I mean, I think one of the Black Mage's more popular songs is the battle theme from Final Fantasy III, and definitely the concerts they do a lot of Final Fantasy
the battle
III
theme
stuff
anyway.
too.
The rest of it's been a few years, so it's gone right
Yeah,
by me. But
no,
I mean,
the
I
I think
still
it's one of the better ones.
None of the NES
well,
music
it's okay, except you get really sick of it because it's a battle theme.
You get sick of all the battle themes, though.
Well, I mean, I don't know. It's like the theme from Hawaii Five-0. It's been in my head for like a decade.
But they really, with FF3, I mean, the obviously the cinematics got a lot more elaborate too, and to go along with that, the music got a lot more elaborate. Well, the ending was really
well,
really
the ending,
lengthy.
sure, but even in the DS game, the cinematics are almost non-existent. I mean,
True.
it's like
well, I mean, NES quality.
it's like one camera angle, 3 people talking to each other.
Right.
I mean,
Well-
from the way they talked in interviews, I thought that the team was going to like do some really spectacular like theatrics or something, but it's not. It's like your little super deformed puppet people going.
Yep. It's interesting.
Putting
It's
up their
interesting
arms
how
and-
close they stuck to the NES version in some
Yeah.
cases.
I mean, frankly, they stuck closer to the original version of this than in the other ones. I mean, one in Dawn of Souls and 4 and all
it's
that.
probably for the best though, because Dawn of Souls, I don't know, the version of Final Fantasy 1 of that wasn't fun. It was a tedious grind.
Well, I thought it was
Well,
was
for
just
all
too
5
easy.
hours that it lasted.
I mean,
Well, yeah,
they
that's
made
the
the-
thing.
they
It
made
was
the game way too
incredibly easy.
Yeah.
Like
There
there
was
was no point
playing.
in doing
Yeah.
anything because you just walked through the game and it was boring. So
if
this
you
actually is pretty much hard as hell.
I mean, it's pretty. I think that they toned down the difficulty a little. I mean, in comparison, just comparing some of the levels, but more or less, I think that they translated the experience gameplay wise to the DS for better or worse.
Well, it's not nearly as compromised as Dawn of Souls was. That's for sure.
Do you really think that Final Fantasy III DS is hard as hell in general?
Certain parts of it.
Huh.
Like, I guess it depends on how you play it, but when I played, I got sucked into the tree dungeon without realizing I was going into the tree dungeon, so I was on edge the entire time thinking, I haven't saved in about half an hour, and if I die now, that's a lot of progress that I lose.
Yeah. I really didn't. I mean,
And the final dungeons are just insane. I mean, you
Right.
come up against enemies, you have your characters at level 50, 60, and you still come up against random
Yeah, I don't think I
encounters
ever
that
actually
can
finished it,
completely-
even with save states.
Yeah, they
It
can
was-
completely kick your ass. And
Yeah,
there's
other
3 of
things to
those
do.
that you have to go through. And you can go back and save at your ship, but that's a long walk.
yeah. The thing is that I got up to the final dungeon. I went through part of it, and I still have the rest to go. And I haven't really found it that okay. As Sharky brought up earlier, this game starts out difficult. It starts out more difficult than it is. I think that could be just a mindset thing, because I was definitely used to like Final Fantasy 1 Game Boy Advance, like I'm going to hold down the A button and just win. But you actually do have to. I think once you get yourself in the mindset of like, okay, this is not an easy game, it gets easier.
Well, it helps, I think, that it's completely turn-based, so that you actually do have time, if you start getting walloped, you can stop and say, okay, I need to rethink, and you can actually strategize, whereas in the more active-based systems, you can't always have that luxury. Either you need to pause, or basically you just get your ass kicked.
See,
I think that helps a lot.
See, I came up from the exact opposite angle. I was expecting it to be I was expecting either they totally dumbed it down, or I was expecting it to be exactly the same as the original version. And I played through it thinking that, and it was actually ended up being easier than I anticipated. So, but most of the people won't be coming from that mindset. I mean, for example, like in the first town, if you go to get some potions, you're attacked by a few werewolves, and they made the enemies easier in that case. And I'm not sure if it's this, if they dumb down the enemies in every case, but in general, things seem to be a little bit easier.
Well, there are places in the game where you can kind of randomly wander into random enemies that are much too powerful to encounter at the
yeah,
moment.
definitely.
Like early in the first town or the second town where everyone's been turned into a ghost, there's the little mine section, and you can walk in there and you'll fight against like skeletons or wraiths or something that are probably about 3 times more powerful than you can handle. But if you actually can defeat one, then you get like big bonuses.
Yeah, or you can walk over to that castle in the beginning, and there's the guard in front of it who just obliterates you.
Oh, I didn't try that.
Yeah, you know how the one where you fly the airship to get into? Yeah, the actual gate is guarded by this guy who just gets into a battle.
I actually remember doing that.
Yeah, because
there's
of course.
There's some the parts of the game that really piss me off where you would just randomly walk someplace on the world map and all of a sudden, oh, you're dead.
Yep, pretty much.
Like the swamp. You don't have a chocobo? Oh, you're dead.
Oh, it just kills you?
Yeah, you just die.
Oh, great.
Says the party was never seen again. Like, there's no warning, and there's no, like, maybe we shouldn't go here or anything.
Yeah.
It shows a little cinematic where you walk in and you disappear into the swamp, and that's game over.
Yep.
Goodbye.
Wonderful. Old school. That's how it was.
Well, I think maybe part of the perceived difficulty also stems from the fact that this game is on DS, which has, generally gotten a reputation for being more casual gamers, especially considering, this is a Japanese game, and in Japan it's like, girls playing Animal Crossing and Tamagotchi Connection. And hardcore games are pretty few and far between on DS, even now.
Yeah.
So, the decision, I think, to make Final Fantasy 3 DS a pretty hardcore game with a respectable challenge level was a little bit of a brave move on Square's part, honestly, because I think it has the potential to alienate their easy sell audience.
Well, they are doing the easy sell game, right? You heard about this?
The Chocobo's Magic Picture Book?
No, actually, Final Fantasy 12 Revenant Wings.
Oh yeah, it's supposed to be like
my first Final Fantasy.
Yeah, it's basically Final Fantasy 12 Mystic Quest, from what I understand.
Oh.
That sounds really awful. And
yeah, it does.
Don't even want to play it.
That's the one with the Nomura.
When are we going to get a DS
Penelo's
redesign?
Anyway.
Yeah.
Penelo's redesign
so.
was enough to make me want to stay away from that one.
Yeah, hopefully that's 2007 holiday, the DS re-release of Mystic Quest.
I'm waiting
that'd be
for
sweet.
touch.
I wonder if you can beat the final boss of Revenant Wings by casting Cure on it. That would be so rich.
Yeah.
No, actually, it would be terrible.
No, that'd be awesome. That would
you could already do that.
That would go a long way towards.
Yeah, I mean,
10?
Check them out.
Yeah, couldn't you unzombie the guy? Is that what it was?
Oh, you could
the big floating
the spider thing, the
ass. Yeah, whatever the fuck that was. It was either like X potion or revive or something would kill him in one shot.
Awesome.
All I remember is it was really, really easy.
It was pathetic. And actually, I think they stuck you with like an auto revive status so you couldn't lose it.
Well, I think that was like a really
impossible to lose.
I like when
that was a really extended and boring version of the final battle against Sephiroth in 7. Where you basically have Omni Slash and you can't possibly lose.
Yeah.
Right.
It was basically the same thing.
I like
Did you
games
lose
when
that,
there's
Starkey?
one.
You're making a face.
Yeah, I tried actually. No, I thought you were talking about the one before it. I actually won that on accident once.
No. Like the
guy like hit me with
was...
the confused thing, and my guy used a potion on himself, and it stuck him in all 7s. So I never actually got to input a command in the last fight with Sephiroth. It did it. I don't know.
Yeah, I remember reading online when Final Fantasy VII came out that if you got to level 99, the last boss Sephiroth would be really, really, really hard, and so I spent countless hours leveling up to level 99, and then
you can revive Eris.
Yeah, that's what I heard too. But
you'd have to talk to the general. I think.
I spent countless hours breeding chocobos, got Knights of the Round. There, I'm like, I'm low level, whatever.
You like instant win then?
Yeah, I like. I was about to say, I like games. I like Final Fantasy games that have 1 or 2 big battles like that. That have 1 or 2 boss battles that are like, oh, and by the way, you can kill him by using de-zombify.
Yeah, there was one in Final Fantasy VIII that you encounter in the desert. And I cast like a cure spell on it, thinking maybe this will hurt it a little bit. Mm-hmm. No, actually, it killed it in one shot. Nice. I was like, well, that was a little anticlimactic, but whatever.
Well,
I'll take
train
the
in 6. You could just like X potion thing.
Yeah. Use a.
No, I would always
down.
I would always suplex the train, but that's just me.
That was awesome too.
Yes, you could.
Yeah.
Wow, Final Fantasy 3, huh?
But that's the wrong Final Fantasy 3 you're talking about.
That is the wrong Final Fantasy 3.
6.
Yes. It is Final Fantasy
not
6.
the DS game. I think it's important to mention this fact over and over again.
Yeah,
because people are
there might be one person on Earth who still hasn't heard this story.
Like people still get that confused. I get that a lot when I'm seeing people talk about it.
Are you sure that's just stupid people?
Well, I don't know. Do stupid people work at 1UP? Because because there was a preview I wrote where I started out saying, "Hey, this game it's not Final Fantasy VI. You shouldn't make that mistake." And then it turns out that the promotional graphics attached
Yeah.
So people were like, hey, dumbass, maybe you should change the promo graphics.
No, you should just say I was being ironic, and then you're bulletproof to everything.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. I forgot the internet defense of snark.
Right. You know what's interesting is that when I saw people playing this in the Tokyo subway lines, you can always tell who's playing Final Fantasy III because the top screen is off.
Yeah, actually, that was one thing that disappointed me with the game, was they didn't really utilize the top screen at all.
Although, what would you do with the top screen for battles? I guess maybe you could move the battle graphics to the top screen and then have the menu on the bottom screen.
At least have some sort of camera.
That would be good.
I mean,
They should
do
have done
something with it. I mean, if you have it, do something with it.
Because you can control the entire thing with the stylus, but you don't want to. Unless you want to be picking at these tiny little words on the touchscreen. No.
You sure don't. One thing that I thought was really interesting about Final Fantasy III for DS is that visually it reminds me a lot of Final Fantasy IX. Like the way your little party lines up, you have 4 little people in a row facing off against an enemy, and it's pretty much that scene, that battle scene all the time. I don't know, that reminded me a lot of Final Fantasy IX.
Actually, visually, to me,
they all look like Gelflings. So
to me, it looked like Final Fantasy Tactics mated with Vagrant Story.
Well, because I wouldn't say Vagrant Story, but yeah, I mean the Final Fantasy Tactics look is obvious because Akihiko Yoshida
the same guy
did the character
art. But still, to me, that sort of
they don't have noses. You could tell.
Of course, yeah, exactly. But but the graphics were a little better, so that's sort of, and they're sort of close-ups on faces.
They're a little more hydrocephalic,
and that sort of reminded me of Vagrant Story a little bit. But it just, to me, it didn't feel like I was playing Final Fantasy.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought it was very much like the kind of classic Final Fantasy that they were going for with Final Fantasy IX, except that
I just didn't get that.
Except that for Final Fantasy III, it actually was a classic Final Fantasy game rather than like a desperate impersonation of a classic Final Fantasy game.
The gameplay-wise, Final Fantasy 3DS, I think they did a decent job, but I'm not saying the art is bad. I think it's very good, but to me, it just doesn't fit with those classic Famicom, Super Nintendo type games.
Really?
Yeah, it's not the same graphical style at all. I would have preferred it, sort of a souped-up version. I mean, this is just my personal opinion.
Well, you'll be happy with Chocobo's Magic Picture Book because there's a game where you actually have to match Final Fantasy III sprites as they fly across the upper screen. So that'll warm your heart
too.
Yeah, Chocobo's Magic Picture Book is FF3-tastic. Playing that is like just they didn't even bother to make any modifications to the Final Fantasy III engine.
No, they know where their bread and butter is, and it's in reusing assets.
Yep,
madly and desperately.
This makes me think. Gee, I wonder if they're not going to remake some other Final Fantasy games.
Well, it's funny because I asked Hiromichi Tanaka when I interviewed him at TGS.
You name dropper. I
am. The director of the game, yeah. Mm-hmm. I actually did ask him that. I said, this game reminds me a lot of Final Fantasy IX on DS.
Yeah.
So what are the chances that we might see like a Final Fantasy IX on DS or some other Final Fantasy game using this engine? And his response was, well, this did really well for us. So, of course we're going to...
and they have the engine, so, they're not going to just use it for one game.
Yeah, so, you can expect them to flagellate this little game engine into a fine paste. They'll probably start with Final Fantasy 1, then do 2, and then get around to 4. And then, right about the time that the DS's replacement comes up, they'll, release Final Fantasy 5 and 6DS while we're all... eagerly playing.
And how about 7? When's that coming?
I was sort of thinking of 7.
7, I don't know. Like I think.
No, let's go straight to 9. You remember this game you didn't like very much in the first 10 place you can get for $5 in the bargain bin? Now you can play it on the bus.
The problem with the PlayStation games is that FMV is going to be integral to the game.
Nuh-uh.
Yeah.
It used to be.
It used to be, and they're not going to admit that all that FMV they put on the PlayStation was a lot of crap that didn't really help the game along. They should, but they're not going to because that would mean that they were wrong and that.
Well, shit, they still crammed a crap load of FMV into 12, and that was really superfluous.
Yeah, they should pare it down to the absolute essentials as far as FMV goes. Cut some, do the rest in
reproduce them in game.
Yeah.
But actually, that's not going to happen.
No, I don't think
that would require work.
I don't think actually that the Final Fantasy 3DS engine is powerful enough to do Final Fantasy because if you look at the game, it's all 3D, but like half the stuff in the game is just a sprite on the 3D background. Like a house, when you go into a village, it's actually just a big sprite that if you zoom in, it gets all blurry and nasty.
Yeah, sure, why not? So, Final Fantasy 7s were pre-rendered.
Final Fantasy
so you don't have to zoom in at all.
They're going to they're not going to do the pre-rendering. Because that would take up too much space on the cartridge. They're not going to have like a 2 gigabyte cartridge for you. Because the cartridges they have now, the largest is 1 gigabit. That's like 1/8 of the space that you
I don't know. I
need.
think they could apply some heavy compression algorithms.
Yeah,
they
and
could
plus
probably get it in
the
there.
DS screen is this big. It's not like a television set. Like we're talking about a bitmap that's literally.
I just don't see it happening. Maybe in the DS2 or more likely.
Yeah, but
on
the only
PSP.
no, I think it's technically feasible. I think they won't do it because that's a lot of work, man. You'd actually have to think about that.
It is okay, true. However, but Final Fantasy III was a lot of work and it paid off for them.
Right. And now what they
can
can do is they can take the really simple games like Final Fantasy 1 and 2 and use the same graphical engine and really have to do.
Yeah, but
I really want to play through those again.
Oh, seriously, I've played through those 3 times.
Yeah,
I didn't say that I want to play through them. That's just what would make the most sense for them to do. It'd be the highest rewards with the least amount of effort.
After releasing them again, I don't know if I see a market, but.
This is horrible. Like I have to believe that it's Final Fantasy.
What was the
because
last time they made Final Fantasy 1? How many remakes was that? Was that 3?
They made 3.
They've done about actually 4 or 5.
4 if you count. There was the original release. There was the Wonder Swan. There was the
Wonder Swan. There's been mobile phones. There's been PlayStation. There's been GBA.
And they've all sold really well. Uh-huh. So there's really no reason for them not to.
Final Fantasy right there in the name.
Oh my god,
that's at least 500,000 sales.
I don't want this. I don't want.
I'm not saying it's a good idea. It's not something I'm saying that I approve of. It's not something that I even ever want to happen, but it's what's going to happen. Come on.
Well, when I said that, I was thinking Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9. I can't believe you really think that 1 and 2 were going to come out on DS in 3D. No. Useless, pointless.
And from what all your connections say, that there's not going to be any original.
Oh, I'm not even going to pretend I have connections about this. I don't anticipate them creating original games. What they'll do is they'll create things like Crystal Chronicles, which are original,
it'll be dirge of
but no one
Cerberus
actually wants
forever.
them.
How about remakes of sagas?
Well,
nobody likes those.
No one likes those,
Saga 1,
but
2,
the
and 3
creator
are not
is
bad.
Akitoshi Kawazu, who is like a high-ranking Square Enix person.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, he has the
So he gets to ruin everybody else's life. Yeah.
Like, we can do this instead of, a Chrono game because that's what I want to do. My theory on Saga is that it was actually, Final Fantasy II was directed by Akitoshi Kawazu, who went on to create the Saga game.
Yeah, they
my
stopped
theory
fucking
is
up
that
our
Saga
series
is basically, right, it's like those ideas from Final Fantasy II quarantined so that they can never, ever contaminate the Final Fantasy series
In fact,
again.
I wouldn't even consider Final Fantasy II part of the Final Fantasy series. I mean, I think it goes 1, 3, then 4. I mean, everything that he does. I mean, I can appreciate Rise of Saga and some of his other better works, but
it turns to death.
Yeah.
The theory that I subscribe to is that Kawazu has naked pictures of Yoichi Wada's wife, and that's the only reason that he gets to keep making video games.
No, I really think it's because he's a vice president. I think that has a lot to do with it. Sorry. It's more pragmatic.
Yeah.
Pure politics. Seniority. The Japanese love that stuff.
I like to think about blackmail. Yeah, you're right. It is. It's
he's
true.
Probably
you
related
can't
to
get
someone.
Yeah.
By marriage or...
Why isn't he... they put Sakaguchi over by the window and had him do nothing of consequence ever again. They can't do that.
That's
for
because
Kawazu?
he created a colossal failure, whereas Kawazu hasn't created a colossal failure. Everything he's done is
just a
they've all been minor
string of
failures.
small failures.
Yeah. But minor failures aren't that big a deal.
There's no
when you have a
additive effect.
gigantic, colossal failure that sells all around the world. That's when you get the boot.
Which colossal failure was this?
The Spirits Within.
Spirits Within.
Oh, that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow,
So
that was too big for me to see, actually.
Now he's off at Microsoft, or working for Microsoft, ripping off Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest.
Right.
That's what happens when you create the Spirits Within.
You get a lot of money
Well,
from Microsoft?
I won't do that.
All right. I have an idea. We'll make millions.
Or run a company in the ground.
Yeah.
Anyway, it is time to wrap this up. For our next Retronauts, I think we're going to be looking at the Nintendo 64 because its anniversary was very recently. Like, actually this week. But we're not just going to be looking at the N64. We're going to be comparing it to the PlayStation 3. Is that a valid comparison? Is the PlayStation 3 really the new Nintendo 64? I kind of feel like it is. But maybe some of you feel like it's not. So we're going to have we're going to have a big brawl next week, and it's going to be great. We're going to bring it to you, not quite live, but pretty close.
All right.
So tune in to Retronauts episode 2, and we'll see you next week.